thank you to everyone present for our webinar on New Zealand residents by investment. My name is Troy Hanley. I am Managing Director of Private Clients based in Henley and Partners London office. I'm joined here with Karen Justice, Licensed Immigration Advisor based in New Zealand. Also with James Usmar and Tim Crawford from Forsyth Barr Investment Advisors based in New Zealand as well. So today we will be discussing primarily the New Zealand Residents by Investment Program, the recent changes that have come up. I'll be first giving an introduction to Henley and Partners for those attendees who are not so familiar with us, a brief overview of New Zealand as a country, before handing over to Karen, who will speak about the program itself for Residents by Investment, the new changes that have come up, soon to be introduced, and a little bit about how the journey works with Henley and Partners for our clients. We'll then hand over to the Forsyth Barr guys to talk about the New Zealand investment landscape and eligible investments for the New Zealand program. So you have 4 Kiwis on this call who will know a bit about New Zealand. So if any questions come up throughout the presentation about country, about residents by investment, about investments, there is a Q&A box where you can leave your questions, and we'll try and answer those throughout or at the end where we'll have time for Q&A. So about Henley and Partners, very briefly, we are the residents and citizenship by investment leaders in the industry. We've been around for over 25 years. That's by far the longest in the industry. We have over 60 offices globally, which again is by far the biggest in the industry as well. We work with over 40 investment migration options. So that's over 40 countries that we can help clients get residence and citizenship in. And we've advised over 25,000 families in the past. The 2 statistics there at the bottom show our government advisory work. So we've advised over 15 governments on the creation and maintenance of these residence and citizenship programs. And we have contributed to that figure there, 12 billion in foreign direct investment for these governments that we help create these programs for. So these are our offices globally, and you can see we are right around the globe. When I started at Henley, it was, I think, 30 or so offices, and it's really blown up, and we're now over 60 with a presence in New Zealand, of course. Okay, so talking a little bit about New Zealand as a country. Firstly, I think one of the most important things to highlight for New Zealand that attracts migrants, and especially wealthy migrants, is the lifestyle and environment that you can have there. It has that world-renowned natural environment, that clean and green reputation that you may have seen in images and videos, that attracts a lot of tourists, and then a lot of people decide to make it their home as well, with very high levels of renewable energy usage, which appeals to more and more families these days. The country itself has high human development index, generally indicating a good level of lifestyle similar to the UK, Canada, and Europe. Population of 5.2 million, which is similar to Ireland, Singapore, Hong Kong. So not very large population. And geographical size, which is similar to the UK, Italy, Norway. So what that means is that it is a relatively small population in a reasonable sized country. So there's a lot of space. There's not the same density that you see in many other countries, particularly in Asia, for example. And that is of great appeal, especially to families with young children. So have put images of New Zealand here to break up all the text and make it slightly more interesting as we go along. Okay, second point to mention about New Zealand and why it is an attractive destination. And this has been a really important point over the past 5 to 10 years, I think, and that is safety and stability. We have a lot going on in the world, conflicts, pandemics, political and social volatility. everywhere you look, especially in countries where you would previously have thought there wouldn't be such instability. Now nationals of these countries are looking at New Zealand, and one main point here is high level of democracy, ranked second on the Global Democracy Index. Secondly, one of the safest countries in the world, ranked fourth on the Global Peace Index. Macroeconomic stability, ranked first in the World Economic Forum Global Competitive Report. And the two bottom points there goes back to really the fact that New Zealand is a little bit isolated. It means that the flights there are going to be a little bit longer, but clients are really attracted to this now with what I mentioned earlier about conflicts globally. New Zealand is away from Europe, that Pacific region around China, the US, even. These are places where there could be potential conflict, and New Zealand is right down the bottom of the map. The final point there is a really interesting one. New Zealand could be a global diversifier because we have clients that are really focused on having a presence in multiple regions globally, ideally as far away from each other as they can, so they don't have all their eggs in one basket. And if you look at that Asia Pacific region, New Zealand really stands out as the best option, basically. If you compare it with Australia, currently has appealing residence programs, but are very strict on the physical presence requirements. You really have to move to Australia, set up there, become a tax resident to make sure that your permanent residence stays valid. And if you don't, your permanent residence will lapse. Compare that with New Zealand, where if you can achieve permanent residence with a very minimal physical presence stay, as Karen will highlight soon, your permanent residence is for life for you and your children. So it really is a program you can basically do remotely without having to fully set up in New Zealand. Also, you've got Nauru and Vanuatu in the vicinity. They're passport programs. They're great alternative travel documents. But ultimately, these are tiny, tiny economies. And if you really wanted a bolt hole in the Asia Pacific region, it would be very hard to set up your life in Nauru, for example. So New Zealand represents kind of the best of both worlds in that regard. Okay. So moving on to the next and final selling point for New Zealand. Yes, it is very safe and secure and has this wonderful natural environment, but it is also good for economy and business. And obviously the Forsyth Bar guys will go into this a bit further shortly. But New Zealand has a relatively high GDP per capita, again, similar to these Western nations such as Japan, Spain, and Israel. Developed market economy with very strong links to Australia, Southeast Asia, and the US. So despite New Zealand being remote, it does have very good links to those growing markets at the moment. Considered the easiest place to do business in the world, ranks #1 in the Ease of Doing Business Index 2020. Low levels of corruption. It's always consistently been ranked for very low levels of corruption. And a relatively beneficial tax system. No gift, estate, or wealth tax, no capital gains tax. Generally considered a lot friendlier tax jurisdiction than a lot of other Anglophone countries, especially Australia, the neighbours. Okay, so I believe that is my part of the presentation complete. And I believe next, I'm going to hand over to Karen, who will speak about the residents, if I can get the slides to work. Okay, yeah, handing over to Karen, who is our licensed immigration advisor, immigration expert.
Thanks, Troy. Much appreciated. So I'm going to talk about firstly just general residence and permanent residence and what that means in a New Zealand context, and then I'm going to take you through some of the changes that are coming into effect shortly to our residence program. So a resident visa in New Zealand allows the holder to live, work and study in New Zealand. Now you can stay indefinitely in New Zealand, so that does not expire. It allows you the freedom to work, to own a business, to not work. You're free to do as you please in that regard. And excuse me, importantly for those with children, in particular teenagers or those looking to study post-secondary those looking to go on to post-secondary study at university or college, they will be given resident domestic student status in New Zealand, so significantly cheaper than attending as a foreign student. So as Troy mentioned, the concept of permanent residence, that is the next stage through, and provided that you're able to maintain your investment appropriately and spend the minimum amount of time in New Zealand during your investment period, you'll qualify for permanent resident visa at the end. And this is your residence for life, so it never expires. You can come and go as you please from New Zealand for the rest of your lives. Importantly, your family can. So again, children may not take up residence, living actually physical residence in New Zealand for some time. That's fine. They've got that preserved there as an option when they do. Compared to Australia, you, as Troy alluded to, you do need to maintain a commitment to Australia. Once we've given permanent residence, that's it. So no day count, no ongoing commitment. The next stage in the evolution, I guess, is citizenship. And of course, becoming a New Zealand citizen then affords you the ability to hold and travel on a New Zealand passport. That is more about a physical residential requirement for citizenship. Essentially, you have to live in New Zealand as the holder of a resident and or a permanent resident visa for 5 years, and that's 5 consecutive years. You are permitted to leave New Zealand. It's not that you're locked down here, but you need to spend a minimum of at least 240 days in each of those 5 12-month periods immediately before you apply actually in New Zealand. So a little bit more onerous than the residence and permanent residence. However, at the end, you're awarded with a passport that's ranked 4th on the current Henley Passport Index. So yeah, well worth it. Just also a note, resident and permanent resident visas afford the same rights in New Zealand when you're here. So as I mentioned, domestic student status, you're also eligible for full public health care, and it gives you the ability to vote in New Zealand if you're a resident here. So the Active Investor Plus visa, this category has been in place since September 2022, and this is the first amendments or changes to the category. They're coming in on the 1st of April, so they've been announced at a reasonably high level 2 weeks ago. And we're expecting the detail to come out on some areas in the next couple of weeks. But we'll go live on the 1st of April. What they've done is they've split the category into 2, the growth and balanced categories, and these are divided according to the type of investment that you're going to make or prepared to make, and also which then flows on to a shorter period of investment time and also a shorter period of time and country. So growth category allows you to invest in direct investments and also approved managed funds. For those familiar with the program currently, these are your 3 and 2 weighting investments, and they have not changed. So NZTE continue to approve both funds and business direct and business investments. And that will continue, and all of those that are approved currently will flow through to the changed category come 1st of April. As recognition of investing in a higher risk investment profile, you're only going to be required to hold that investment for 3 years, a minimum of 3 years, and then for a day count reduction correspondingly. Balanced category offers you a wider range of investment options. Some of them are more passive than others, and this is reflected in the fact that the government's asking you to invest $10 million New Zealand into these one or more of the categories, and for a period of 5 years, so 2 years longer than the growth. It will give you, however, you can reduce. These are all minimum amounts, and under the balanced category, there is an option to increase your investment, and in return for that, you receive a reduction in your day count in New Zealand. And I think the next slide will give you a little bit more detail. So that's a direct comparison between the two as they currently stand. So 5 and 10 million, you can see there that the balanced category offers a much broader range of investments. It's absolutely fine to have some approved managed funds and direct business investments in your balanced category portfolio if you wish, but you're only required to invest 10 million, and you can make it as passive or as active as you wish. You can see there the investment period, 3 years versus 5 years. And finally, the physical presence requirements. These have been reduced significantly, particularly for the growth category. Excuse me. So from 1st of April, if you've invested in the growth category, you will only be required to spend a minimum of 21 days in New Zealand over that 3-year investment period. So that is combined total. You can make that in one or as many trips as you'd like, or you can do the 21 days in one go, and then you're done. And worth noting also that this is only the principal visa holder who needs to spend this time in New Zealand. The family, if you have family included in the initial application, you will be able to, they need to come to New Zealand once in the first 12 months after the visa is issued to activate it. And then after that, they have no obligation to return. Obviously, they're welcome to. The balance category, again, same rules, but 105 days over the 5-year investment period. And most notable, these days can be reduced by 2 weeks at a time for each additional $1 million that you invest in managed funds or direct business investments. So not as part of your 10 million, but if you're investing 11 or 12 or 13 million, then you can have up to 6 weeks or 42 days taken off that 105-day total. Worth noting, just finally, that philanthropy is accepted and encouraged, and that forms part of the balanced category suite of investments, permitted investments. Thanks, Troy. So in terms of the investment itself, it's obviously a big topic of discussion and a key part to the visa process. I'm not authorised to talk about, what's a good investment, what isn't. I can tell you what's approved, what's not, who you might want to talk to. But Henley & Partners works with investment partners and to help you understand and to give you a broad idea, and also ongoing assistance should you wish to have that, in terms of what is possible and more about the investment landscape. And Tim and James are going to talk to you a little bit more detail about this when I'm done. So they will be able to talk to you about all of the eligible investments, should you wish to. It's well worth having a chat with James and Tim because they are quite knowledgeable and have been around for quite some time to talk about these things. So you're not alone. We will work with you to help find appropriate investments for your comfort level, and that will also fit in the program itself. So what does your journey with Henley & Partners look like should you come through the process with us? So what we'll do is we'll have an initial eligibility assessment. We'll have a chat generally with myself and or one of my team in New Zealand, and we'll look at your situation and your what requirements are and how they fit into your circumstances, most importantly, to check that you will be able to get through the process, and that we try and tease out any red flags that might be present. These could be things such as custody of children, health issues, ownership of assets and the structuring, and of course you will have some ideas and questions about how those would fit and work in New Zealand once you're here. So we can talk about all of those. Tease out any red flags so that there's a minimum of surprise as we go through the process. Then recommend a discussion with Forsyth Barr or investment partners to understand what your options are to invest, what do you have, and given the time frame of the transfer and invest period, which I'll talk about in a moment, it's quite short, so it's a very good idea to go into this process with a good idea, if not committed, to understanding where you're going to place your funds for your investment. Once that's all done and you're happy to proceed, you'll go through the onboarding process with Henley & Partners, which is pretty standard. For those of you who've done other programs with the firm, you'll be familiar with that. And at that point, myself and my team will start preparing your residence application, gathering documentation, submitting it to Immigration New Zealand on your behalf, and liaising with Immigration New Zealand through the process should they have any questions. Will also be the time for you to really start engaging with your investment partners in terms of who you've decided to invest with, which could be multiple parties or it could be one. After processing time, after the application has been processed and Immigration New Zealand are essentially happy with your application, it's given what we call approval in principle, and essentially that is that's a strong signal that your application is going to be approved, but it's not the final approval. It starts a 6-month period of what we call transfer and invest. You need to, at that point, liquidate your assets that you've nominated in your application and transfer the funds through the banking system to New Zealand. Once that's been done, obviously you'll make your investments, and then we will need to provide documentation to Immigration New Zealand to show that you have actually invested the proceeds of your assets that were part of your application. New Zealand, as Troy mentioned, we regularly feature on the, very highly on the lack of corruption and ease of doing business metrics. And so the government is very keen to ensure that the money that's coming in through this program is lawfully earned, lawfully owned, and is all transferred legitimately. So there are some careful steps to be had at this transfer and invest stage to avoid having your funds not accepted by immigration. So once they've looked at that paperwork, finally, residence visas granted and your investment period starts. So that's either the 3 or the 5 years. At the end of the investment period, assuming that you've spent your time in New Zealand, that you need to do minimum 21 or 105 days or less. The conditions that are attached to your resident visa that says that you must maintain that investment and spend minimum time here are removed, and that paves the way to apply for a permanent resident visa. That application is very simple. It's nothing to the level that the actual initial application is, and they're currently taking just a couple of weeks to process those. And that is it for the immigration process. For those of you who have moved to New Zealand during your investment period, you'll be well on your way to qualifying for citizenship. For those who haven't, that could be something that you start, at some point in the future. The resident and permanent resident visas are family applications. Citizenship becomes an individual one, so you may find that people in your family qualify ahead of others. For example, your children, if they come here to study, by the time they've done, they're probably going to be very close to qualifying for citizenship. And I think that might be me, apart from Troy's and my contact details. So feel free to reach out to us. Troy's in London, I'm in New Zealand, and or your local Henley advisor can put you in touch with us as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. I think we're handing over to Forsyth Barr now. Guys, like to take over?
Thanks, Troy. If you just stop sharing, I'll share my screen.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for having us here. We're very passionate New Zealand advocates, and we really enjoy helping people become Kiwis. It's very rewarding work. It is fairly early in the morning here, and I'm working from home. So if my 3-year-old son starts to, decide to join us, just bear with me. I'll hand over to James. So James and I represent a company called Forsyth Barr. We're celebrating our 90th year in New Zealand this year. And Forsyth Barr is a private wealth advisory firm. James and I are financial advisors. And what that means is that we are whole of market investment advisors. We do not have our own funds as a firm or investment products, but rather we sit on our client's side of the table as their trusted advisor and partner in New Zealand. Our goal is to help our clients meet their investor visa obligations firstly, to become Kiwis, and to navigate the investment landscape in New Zealand in a way that meets their own risk tolerance, goals, and aspirations. Doing business on the other side of the world is pretty scary sometimes, and we help to provide peace of mind with comprehensive due diligence and investment options. James and I have worked with investor migrants for over a decade, and our specialty is providing full financial advice, creating individualized portfolios that are based around our clients' unique needs. So I thought I'd touch on the New Zealand economy because a lot of the categories, throughout our landscape here. So New Zealand is a pretty dynamic and resilient economy at the bottom of the world. We offer a stable and highly regulated and safe and business environment for applicants. With a population of 5 million, we're mostly concentrated in the North Island, and our country really enjoys low population density with a high quality of life. 2024 was a bit of a challenging year for the country. Like many around the world, we spent a fair amount during COVID, and we're starting to see the government actively reduce their budget and spending, with the idea that immigration plays an important part in helping our country to recover. Lastly, interest rates are expected and are declining quite rapidly here. So we had an interest rate cut 2 days ago. We're very rapidly heading to a 3% official cash rate here, which is set by our Reserve Bank. We're a trading nation, and we're still heavily exposed to primary sectors. Our main markets, or our main export markets, are milk, meat, wood, and they remain a core economic driver of our economy here. Importantly, China is our largest trading partner, with the United States our second. With a population of 5 million and an island, somewhat reliant on global trade, we're very careful to uphold our role within the West, but also we are particularly incentivized to ensure that our relationship with China remains very strong. So the business environment. I know it's pretty cliche, but New Zealand really boxes above its weight on the global stage when it comes to business. Many applicants have heard about our sporting prowess with the All Blacks, or our movie prowess with The Lord of the Rings, for example. But we have a really amazing culture here where everyone believes they can be an entrepreneur. They can have an idea, build it in the garage, and sell it to the world. And we have some amazing local heroes who have done just that. Whether it's companies like Rocket Lab, which is now competing with SpaceX for #1 in rocket launches, or OpenStar, who is trying to scale nuclear fusion, or Crimson Education, which is helping kids around the world access the best universities globally. Kiwis are really good at doing hard things within a very profitable niche and on a very tight budget. The things that we need help with, and what we're targeting with this visa as a country, is for access to capital, global expertise, and networks. And what we do, James and I do, is try to connect applicants and to the right founder or investment, bringing global ideas, expertise, and help our companies grow, outperform, create jobs, wealth, and meaningful and innovative growth in New Zealand more broadly. It's also a pretty good time to be buying Kiwi dollar. We're near the bottom end of our historical range, so it's a good time to move some money into New Zealand. Okay, so different pathways or options that you have. So Karen has touched on this, and I won't go too much into it, but the revamped Active Investor Plus program does represent or give you the option to invest quite widely within our economy. So touching on the balance categories. We're very supportive of philanthropic gifting at Forsyth Bar. Supporting investor migrants in their philanthropic ambitions requires some skill and knowledge, especially within country. In my role, we meet with a client, understand their values and aspirations, let them know what New Zealand's cultural and structural landscape looks like. Generally, philanthropy is not just about giving. It's about participation, engagement in country, and having an impact. We're a very small country. You can see exactly where your dollars have been used and the impact that it's having here. Many of our investor migrants also seek to connect with like-minded people here, individuals through their charitable efforts. And that can take a little bit of time to understand what the course of action is. Moving on to our listed markets. So our listed markets for equities and bonds are very much dominated by big industrial type businesses here. So we're a small island nation with 5 million people. So very quickly you can get to the end of your growth period as a business. Our stock market is dominated by our utility providers, for example, or our airport with Auckland Airport, transport and retirement and property. And a lot of the companies pay high income as they return their profits to shareholders instead of reinvesting for growth. Our bond markets, we also have government bonds, which are able to be bought in this category. We've just lowered interest rates 2 days ago, so our official cash rate is now at 3.75%, and our government bond rates are not too much higher than that. An applicant is also able to invest into our local council bonds or local agency bonds, and they support 26 councils across New Zealand with environmental and infrastructure funding, for example. To give you an idea, so our government bond rates are around 4 or under 4% per annum, and our local council may be 0.5% higher than that at most. With our corporate bond market between, say, 1 to 2% higher than our government bond rates, depending on the quality or the company which has issued the bond. Property is very much back on the table as an investment option. We don't know what that looks like yet. And my personal opinion is that the government is looking to incentivize residential and commercial property development and social housing projects in New Zealand. New Zealand has some of the highest property prices in the developed world, and it is quite tricky for Kiwis to buy homes. So my view is that they're looking to increase the housing stock throughout New Zealand, and for investor migrants to play a part in building out that housing stock. So the 5 million category, or the growth category, an investor migrant can invest across managed funds firstly. So I'll go through the different managed fund types. So private equity is focused on investing into established private businesses. Typically, they invest into 10 to 15 different companies within their portfolio. Those businesses have generally been around for some time. They have large revenues between 10 to 100 million annually. They're well respected, well run, and typically just before IPO, for example. A lot of our market is what would be deemed as venture capital, where these are companies that, from having an idea stage right through to, say, Series A and B. A venture capital fund may have between 20 to 30 companies within their portfolio. And these companies are within our technology software. We have a very vibrant space sector here. Or they're companies that may have spun out of the university, for example. These businesses need to be global from day one generally, due to the market size that we have here. They target a strong and profitable niche. And because we have quite a lack of capital down here, these businesses need to be profitable, firstly, and really focused on how they, grow to be a size that can be taken out. The final fund type within managed funds is private credit. So to give a bit of background, we're dominated by 4 large Australian banks in New Zealand, and they're pretty happy just working with our residential mortgages. They compete quite heavily there, which means that they do not do a lot of business lending like banks around the world. So private credit plays a really important part in our economy. It provides lending to companies that need help with cash flow management, or mergers and acquisitions, or growth capital, or succession, for example. And the private credit loans are typically between 1 to 4 years, which means that as a fund, they have maturities which are a lot sooner. That is, very helpful for investor migrants, because the funds are open-ended generally, and they do provide liquidity at the end of the visa period, or 3 years. So the final category within the growth is direct investment. NZTE have a live deals list, which enables a New Zealand business to advertise themselves for international investment. The way that we have been looking at direct investments, or helping our investor migrant clients, is to introduce them to our fund management sector as well, our private equity and venture capital managers. They are really experts on the ground here. They spend every day looking at companies and assessing them. So it's a good way in which to have a lot of due diligence around making a direct investment decision. James, would you like to touch on our service?
So once a client has decided that New Zealand is the destination for them, we want to make things as easy as possible. The deployment and complexity around some of the asset classes can make it quite intimidating. So what we as a firm did is worked closely with the government and got our investment management service approved. So as soon as you deploy $1 into our investment management service, you have met your immigration investment requirements. So we work pretty closely with government to get that sorted out. That allows us quite a lot of investment flexibility. So what we do is create an investment mandate, which is personalized to you, and then we can work to deploy capital slowly into that. One of the great things about New Zealand is that it's small and far away from people. One of the disadvantages of that is that means that often private market investments of a standard that we would want to use aren't always available. So we're not pressured by the time constraints of your immigration journey to deploy straight away. As long as the money sits within our service, we can go out to the market and find funds and take our time. The other thing is that under our service, we can use some of the funds which aren't on the approved list, and the larger and more established investment managers haven't necessarily taken the time to register under the government scheme because they don't need to raise capital in that way. We are able to deploy capital into those investment funds, so give you arguably a slightly lower risk or higher return journey. So yeah, we've managed to register our investment service, which is designed to make life as easy as possible for anybody who's moving here. Thanks, Tim.
I wanted to just give an example of something to think about for the growth category. Because it is a 3-year investment obligation, the different asset classes within this category have different time horizons. A private equity or venture capital fund generally has a 10-year time horizon before they need to return the whole fund. So our preferred approach for clients is to have a more conservative journey, ensuring that access to the majority of their funds near the end or just after the visa lock-in period. And private credit has the highest level of liquidity. It forms a key part of our advice. And the private credit in nature pays a lot of income. The fund managers are servicing businesses with lending. So the loans are between 1 to 4 years. They pay a lot of income, and the applicant is able to withdraw that income throughout the 3-year period. That can be used to fund trips while they're in New Zealand, rentals, holidays, or it's a great way to make additional or direct investments outside of their visa obligations or support philanthropic causes. With the remaining 1 million of the 5 million total, we typically look to diversify across private equity and venture capital with our clients. And because we don't have a time constraint, we need to be fully deployed by year 3, which is in line with the government's obligations. But we can take up to 3 years to find the right investments within that remaining 1 million. I thought I'd just give you an idea of what the journey looks like for private equity and venture capital. So fund managers will look to find investments and call your capital over the first 4 years. Once that 4-year period has been completed and they've found or fully deployed the fund, we start to see outcomes or exits from those companies that they have purchased in the first 4 years. That means that an investor's or applicant's initial capital starts to be returned from year 5 to 7 generally, and then from year 7 to 10, the remaining companies are sold and profits are distributed. So an investor can sort of expect to start to see their initial capital from a commitment into private equity and venture capital from, say, year 5 to 7, and then their profits up to year 10. As an estimate, and just to give you some idea, our private equity fund managers on average generate around 15% per annum return over the life of the fund, and venture capital is between 20 to 25%. Throughout the life of your relationship with us, we will provide you with specialist advice support. We really help people move to New Zealand where, with housing and schooling and, questions that you have moving to the other side of the world. So James has been looking after investor migrants for 12 years. I spent a lot of time overseas and, returned and started working with James for the last 3. We really enjoy helping people move here and pretty passionate Kiwi advocates. So if you have questions, we can answer them. And I'd just like to close by saying that this visa is really an attraction visa. Our businesses and economy need skills, your skills, networks, expertise, and capital to grow and create amazing New Zealand outcomes. Our government is very committed to making this as easy as possible. As you can see, they've slimmed down and made it a lot more flexible around what you can do to receive permanent residence. And where other countries have started to look inwards, we continue to look outwards to provide migrants with a safe harbour or a plan B, a place to enjoy retirement or raise your kids. And I think that thought really reflects our culture here as a young country at the edge of the world. So yes, so James and I are always happy to help you make a decision to become a Kiwi. So yeah, thanks Troy and Karen for having us on. It's nice to be here.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. So if anyone has any questions, please send them through. There's a couple of large ones a large question that's come through. Maybe James or Tim, you want to have a look at that large question if you can see it. And whilst you're reading,
I can take that.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead if you'd like to.
So I'll just pick on the first part of the question in terms of liquidity. Yeah, the question, you're absolutely right. The bond and equity market under the balance categories, obviously, those are traded daily, so 2 or 3 days to get you out of most of those. Under the private market stuff, the venture capital largely illiquid and could be sort of 7, 8, 10-year journey. That's why we've favored using private credit. And we will, where possible, use private credit funds which allow people to exit just after their visa investment lock-in period has ended. So yeah. So bonds, equities, very liquid in New Zealand. Venture capital, private equity, highly illiquid, and then private credit can be illiquid, can be liquid, and depending on what the clients need, we'll stage that so they can have liquidity at that 3, 4, 4.5 year period, depending on what their visa conditions are. So with the balance category, can you invest in a $2.8 million US holiday home? No. Residential property and holiday homes aren't a permitted asset under the investment scheme. If you wanted to buy a home here, you generally have to come and live here and become ordinarily resident as the rules stand, and that investment wouldn't count for any of your visa requirements. So in terms of taxation, there is no capital gains tax or estate duties in New Zealand. We charge income tax if you're not non-resident here from a tax perspective, but hold investments here. We generally charge something called non-resident withholding tax. So that's just a 15 or 25% income tax on interest. We provide consolidated reporting back to the country of your residency to work with your accountant CAs so that you don't pay double tax. We've got, I think, 37 tax treaties around the world. The US, we've got a really good one, and Europe, etc. So you don't pay you're not double taxed. Then the third one, can parties pay for the applicant investments, e.g. a wealthy parent? And that's really a question probably for you, Karen.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I can take the last two. So the short answer is yes, you can gift the investment funds to a third party, whether they be an adult child or someone unrelated. The key is that the funds will need to be gifted and in the possession of the recipient at the time they lodge their application, and you'll need to sign an affidavit or a declaration to confirm that the funds have been gifted unconditionally, so you're not expecting any return on them, so they're not a loan. And also that you will need to show, if you have gifted the funds, how those funds were earned to ensure that the lawful earnings and ownership requirements have been met. But essentially, that's not a problem. That can be done. And the final question, in terms of New Zealand residency program, have any prohibited nationalities for applying? No, is the answer. So if you meet the requirements, it does not matter which country you're from. There's no no requirement at all to be on a list of acceptable nationalities. There are certain aspects of the policy that makes it more difficult for some nationalities to apply. For example, those countries where there are foreign exchange restrictions, if your money is not out of that country, it can be difficult to transfer them to New Zealand in accordance with the New Zealand government rules, but also your own, that government's rules as well. So both must be satisfied, and sometimes they don't quite match. So that can add some complexity. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, there is no restriction on who can apply from where.
Karen, do you want to go for the next one as well?
I can. So the question is, what are the compliance requirements? Whoops, no, it just jumped. Are there likely to be further changes to the program rules, or are they settled now? The answer is they will be settled for a period of time now. There is a review scheduled in 18 months' time, or 18 months from April, to check that the program is excuse me, delivering what it is intended to. And there may be some minor tweaks, but essentially that will be it. It's really important to understand that the underlying requirements of the program are not actually changing on the 1st of April. Your funds still must have been earned lawfully. They must be owned directly or lawfully, and that you still must meet health and character requirements. The things that are changing is the English language requirement has been removed, and that there are the way that you invest and the period of time that you invest for have changed. So we may see some minor tweaking in 18 months' time, but the intention is that it is not, changed every 2 years, that we then re-enter a stable period, which is what we had prior to the current AIP being introduced in 2022.
Do you want to do the next one as well, Karen?
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry. So compliance requirements regarding source of funds. Can you move funds from a country, not your country of origin? You absolutely can. That's not a problem. And in fact, I've helped many clients with this exact situation. What must be shown, however, as part of the application, is that the funds were either earned lawfully in that third country, or that they were transferred to that country lawfully. So again, if there are any foreign exchange restrictions from your own country, but you've moved funds to a third country in the past, that's absolutely fine. Excuse me, but you must be prepared to show that those funds moved to the third country lawfully in accordance with government requirements.
So I'll just take the next one. So buying residential real estate is there's a requirement as it stands at the moment for you to be ordinary resident here for a period of time before doing that. However, there is a scheme or some rules here which is called One House to Live In. So Karen and her team can apply to our Overseas Investment Office to get you an exemption, which should, if your intention is to become ordinary resident here, allow you to buy residential real estate very quickly. That wouldn't be part of your visa investments, but would afford you a home to live in, which we can take offline and have a chat about, because it's very client specific. And there's no cap on the number of people who can apply, just the resources of New Zealand immigration. Let's see, what's the last one?
Yep, I can take the last one.
Okay.
So if a child obtains permanent residence through their parents, what happens in the future to subsequent generations? Excuse me. So a couple of things. Children, dependent children can be included in the application up to their 25th birthday. So as long as they have not turned 25 and they are substantially dependent on you at the time the application is submitted, then they are fine to be included. The moment they have their own partner, and or child, then they are excluded from the definition of dependent child automatically. But to answer, so if they subsequently become independent during your investment period, that's not a problem. If they turn 25, 26, 27, again, that's no issue. It is at the time the application is made. Now, subsequently, if the child decides to come back to New Zealand and live as a permanent resident visa holder, and has a child in New Zealand, as long as one parent at least is a citizen or a resident or a permanent resident visa holder, the baby is born in New Zealand, it will be a New Zealand citizen by birth, and that's an automatic. New Zealand recognises multiple citizenships, so it shouldn't affect. New Zealand is fine with the baby also having other citizens, and anybody actually having multiple citizenships. In terms of if the baby is born offshore, so the permanent resident visa is held, but they're not living in New Zealand. If neither parent is a New Zealand citizen and the baby is born offshore, then the baby has no automatic immigration status in New Zealand conferred. But it is possible to apply for and support a partner if they don't have a New Zealand citizenship or residence, and any dependent children for their own residence visas. So your children will be able to do that for their children. After that, it will really become, well, that can carry on in perpetuity as long as the somebody has a permanent resident or a resident visa. So it's fine. Yeah, and there's no physical requirement, physical time requirement, obviously, that can happen at any stage once the permanent resident visa's been granted.
Great.
Some good questions.
Good questions. Yeah, we've just gone to the hour now, so we'll wrap up there. But thank you for everyone who's joined the webinar, and thank you, Karen, James, and Tim, for being here. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Troy.
Bye.